I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For a very, very long time, and for most of Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history, the Neos or Neo-Spatian archetype has been pretty much a joke. Nowadays, though, that's not really the case, which is pretty interesting. Obviously, we've seen cards like Neo-Space Connector and Neo-Spatian Aquadolphin in tons of Warrior decks, even recently in Infernoble decks, and we've seen cards like Neos Fusion into Rainbow Neos in a lot of control decks that want to board wipe the opponent. In Duel Links, we've also seen Neos Fusion into Brave Neos, which was a very strong engine in a lot of decks for a while, but for most of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, the Neos archetype was really, really bad. If any of you played like me during the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX era of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, you might remember that a lot of those sets were very lopsided. You would have like 1, 2, maybe 3 great cards per set, and the rest of the cards were pretty much completely garbage. A lot of these cards, by the way, were from the anime, so maybe it's not their fault. They were just cards that were featured in the show, so obviously they had to be imported into the sets. But sets were really anime focused back then, so not only would we get cards that were featured in the anime, but we would also see support cards for these anime archetypes made in a similar style to the anime cards, which means that they were not very good. And as we learned a few weeks ago, Jaden actually had tons of really good cards that he used in the anime that saw play in the TCG, but he also had even more cards that were really, really bad. And in today's video, I want to talk about one of the worst cards I have ever seen in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. And obviously, worst can mean different things in different situations. If you're talking about a card like Zone Eater, you're complaining about how bad it is. If you're talking about a card like Christian Helke Fibrax and saying that's one of the worst designed cards in the entire game, you're talking about how overpowered it is. But in today's video, I want to tell you about a card that I feel is one of the most useless cards in the entire game, a card that makes no sense. This is during an era where so many of the cards were very similar to this and that they really made no sense outside of the anime, but because of how anime focused those sets were, they were included anyway, which meant that a lot of players were pretty disappointed when they opened their packs and pulled some really, really bad cards. That brings us to the card that I want to talk about next, released in Tactical Evolution, and I think if you never watched the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime, you probably have never heard of this card, but this is truly one of the worst cards I've ever seen. Next is a normal spell that says, send one face-up Neo-Spatian monster you control to the graveyard, special summon one level 4 monster with the same name from your extra deck. Maybe on paper this doesn't seem that bad, and I'll show you the monsters that you can summon with this card. Obviously the picture features all 6 of the Neo-Spatian monsters, so you would assume that there would be 6 fusions that you could summon with this next. However, that is not the case. So in the Tactical Evolution set, there was 1 card you could summon, and then later on in Phantom Darkness, we got 1 more card. So of these 6 Neo-Spatians, Nex only works with 2 of them, despite having all of them in the artwork. Now, there's one thing that I want to make very clear about Nex that pretty much killed any chance of this card being good at any point. Because the Neo-Spatian in the extra deck has to have the same name as the one that you are sending, you can only have a combined total of 3 copies of either of them in your deck. That is really, really bad because it means that at best you'll probably play 2 copies of the main deck one and 1 copy of the extra deck one, but it makes it very difficult to make a deck around these cards because you just don't have enough copies of the Neo-Spatians and you'll only ever have 1 copy of the extra deck monster. This is very similar, of course, to the Harpy Lady 1, 2, and 3 and Cyber Harpy Lady ruling, where you can only have 3 total copies of any of those cards in your deck. I think this is the only case in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where we've seen an extra deck monster that has the same name as a main deck monster, but the ruling is still the same, which makes this card a lot worse than it may appear. Like I said, there was only 1 fusion that you could summon with Nex in Tactical Evolution. Let's take a look at Neo-Spatian Marine Dolphin. This is a level 4 Water Warrior fusion with 900 attack and 1100 defense. This card's name is also treated as Neospacian Aqua Dolphin. This card cannot be special summoned except with Nex. Once per turn, you can discard 1 card to look at your opponent's hand and select 1 monster card in it. If you control a monster with attack greater than or equal to the selected monsters, destroy the selected monster and inflict 500 damage to your opponent. That effect might sound a little familiar, and it's because it is in fact almost the exact same effect as the original Neospacian Aqua Dolphin. The only difference here is that you do not take 500 damage if you miss the effect. This is why these cards are so weird. What is the point of Neospacian Marine Dolphin? Well, the point, I suppose, that you are supposed to then use this card to summon the great, the awesome elemental hero Marine Neos. Let's take a look at what this card does, because this is the big end goal for running Nex in your deck. Marine Neos is a level 8 water warrior monster, obviously a fusion, with 2800 attack points and 2300 defense. It takes, of course, elemental hero Neos plus Neospacian Marine Dolphin. Must first be special summoned from your extra deck by shuffling the above cards you control into the deck. You do not use polymerization. Once per turn, you can destroy 1 random card in your opponent's hand. Oh my gosh, is this a lot of work to get to an effect that I'm pretty sure might even be worse than the original Aqua Dolphin. The thing that makes Aqua Dolphin so powerful is that you get to see your opponent's entire hand and you get to choose what they get rid of. With Marine Neos, I suppose you don't have to get rid of a card in your own hand, but the random effect just makes this thing so much worse. It's actually very similar to the problem with the original Aqua Neos. Aqua Neos still requires you to discard a card, which is really bad, so I suppose that Marine Neos does have that slight advantage, but it takes a lot more to get to the Marine Neos, and it's not really worth it in the end. This is such a weird upgraded form of these Neospacian cards. What is the purpose of them? I don't understand. How do you have to use all of these cards to get to this monster that basically is worse than what you originally started with in many situations? What it comes down to is that pretty much every single upgraded version of Aqua Dolphin is at the same power level or worse than the original. By the time you get to Neospacian Marine Dolphin, you have used so many of your cards and the payoff is just not there. This is truly one of the worst upgrades I've ever seen in this game, and I really mean that. I cannot believe that they thought this would be a combo that people would use. I mean, realistically, they probably didn't think that, but it is just crazy to me that they actually put these cards in a real set. These are terrible, and I think they realized that pretty fast, because the only other card, like I said, that you can summon with Nex is Neospacian Twinkle Moss, which is the upgraded form of Glow Moss. The difference here is a little bit more noticeable. You get the draw to check the card type versus your opponent getting the draw with the original Glow Moss, but still, this card is not very good. It's way too slow, and obviously it didn't see any play. But this one is even more ridiculous because there is not an elemental hero version of Neospacian Twinkle Moss. That is the end of the line, and then it doesn't even make any bigger fusions. It just sits there by itself. What is the point of this card? I think Nex is one of the most frustrating cards I've ever seen. I know it sounds like I'm complaining about nothing here, probably, but this thing just blows my mind. I mean, this is such a terrible card, and it really just makes no sense. That is pretty much all I have to say about Nex. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it was a little bit more rambly than some of my other videos, but I have been thinking about this card because a friend and I were talking about it, and I just cannot get over how bad it was. I mean, who thought this was a good idea to put into real Yu-Gi-Oh sets? These cards should have stayed anime only. I think everyone knows that. But anyway, I will see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.